The court's verdict came as a surprise to many, because despite the brutality of the crime, the perpetrator received a fairly lenient punishment. The investigator who worked on the case admitted that over the years of his work, he had interrogated hundreds of suspects, but for the first time he encountered such a cold-blooded and emotionless individual. He also hinted that the police had suspicions that the criminal may have had an accomplice who likely participated in hiding the body and dismembering it. But let's take a closer look at the case of Caitlin Markham. Caitlin, a 21-year-old girl, lived in the small town of Fairfield, Indiana. Those who knew her described Caitlin as somewhat eccentric, but an extremely creative, kind and sensitive person. From early childhood, she showed an extraordinary interest in art and was constantly in search of new ideas for her creative projects. At the time of the events in 2011, Caitlin was studying graphic design at the Art Institute of Ohio in Cincinnati, and in her free time from studying, she worked part-time at a local bridal salon. For 6 years, Caitlin had been dating John Carter, who proposed to her the previous year. The young couple had already begun planning their life together in Colorado and their future wedding. John, like Caitlin, was a creative person and was engaged in glassblowing. In August 2011, the girl was just about to celebrate her 22nd birthday, finish her studies, and move to another state where a happy married life awaited her. Caitlin had many prospects and radical changes ahead of her, so when she suddenly stopped responding to calls and her phone immediately went to voicemail, it caused great concern among her family and friends. A day passed, but there was no news from the girl. John decided to visit her house. Caitlin's car was parked outside, but no one was inside. The groom did not notice any signs of a burglary or disorder. The girl's mobile phone had also disappeared, and her pet was left unattended, which greatly alarmed John. On August 14, around 8 in the evening, he called the emergency services and reported his fiancé missing. John explained that he last saw Caitlin the night before, around midnight, when he left her home. According to him, the girl stayed at home and was not going to go anywhere. In the morning, she did not respond to his message, and later her phone stopped accepting calls altogether. The police officers who arrived at the call immediately noticed scratches on John's neck. At first, he explained their appearance as careless use of an electric razor, but later admitted that he himself did not know exactly where they came from. However, the groom assured that there was nothing suspicious about it. He stressed that due to worrying, he slept poorly and only wanted Caitlin to return home as soon as possible. The girl's parents, especially her father Dave and younger sister Ellie, also had no idea where Caitlin could be. Dave noted that his daughter had always been purposeful and responsible, had clear plans for the future and simply could not disappear without warning. After carefully checking everything, law enforcement officers found no reason to consider John involved in the girl's disappearance and switched to other versions. A large-scale search was launched in Fairfield. More than 100 people, including police officers, firefighters and volunteers, combed the streets, parks, forests and outskirts of the city. They handed out flyers with Caitlin's photo to passers-by and tried to gather any information that could help the investigation. Instead of celebrating the girl's birthday, her loved one spent time searching for her, hoping to find out what really happened to her. John did not hide that Caitlin was the love of his life, and he simply could not believe that she could just leave and disappear. The girl was last seen on Saturday evening. According to the groom, he left her around 11:30 p.m. An hour later, she sent him a message with a photo, and this was the last confirmed contact with her. When Caitlin did not show up for work at the bridal salon, it became clear to everyone that something extraordinary had happened. Her colleagues and friends sounded the alarm, because they knew the girl well and were sure that she would never disappear just like that, without any explanation. John continued to write to her, but there was no response. He tried to call, but no one picked up the phone. The groom could not believe that his beloved could leave like this, without warning anyone. She had always been extremely responsible and would not have allowed herself such an act. John was gripped by fear. he could not find a place for himself. Caitlin's plans included celebrating her birthday in a restaurant, and the young man hoped that he would be able to do it together with her. Law enforcement officials reported that no traces of a struggle or signs of disorder were found in the missing girl's house. Only Caitlin herself and her mobile phone, the location of which could not be established, disappeared. It also became known that the girl was last seen wearing a gray t-shirt. Some details caught the attention of the volunteers who participated in the search. After analyzing the data of Caitlin's mobile operator, it was found out that messages were sent from her phone to John between 11:04 p.m. and 11:36 p.m. And already at 12:06 a.m., the phone was either turned off, ran out of battery, or the SIM card was removed. At this point, all traces were lost. Investigators questioned the manager of the local branch of Jack Credit Union, who said that 3 weeks before the disappearance, on July 20, 2011, Caitlin visited them together with John's mother. The girl wanted to get a credit card, and the groom's mother agreed to be her guarantor. During their conversation, the manager heard the woman joking that she would sign all the documents, but only if Caitlin agreed to take her son with her to Colorado. The girl did not react to this joke in any way, did not even smile, and looked very thoughtful. In the end, the credit card was not issued then. Another witness told the police that he spent the evening of August 13 in the company of Caitlin and John. The young people were discussing their plans to move, while the girl sat at her laptop and studied. According to the witness, Caitlin was very thoughtful and not as energetic as usual. He left around 10:45 p.m., leaving the couple alone. At the same time, he noted that he did not notice any scratches on John's neck. However, he admitted that he might simply not have paid attention to it. Although the results of a polygraph test are not considered evidence in court, this witness agreed to take it. The test confirmed that he was telling the truth. It also became known that on the night of August 13 to 14, 2 local teenagers who secretly left the house noticed 2 cars driving away from Caitlin's house with their headlights off. However, no one else could confirm this information, so the police had no other leads. The news that Caitlin had gone missing instantly spread throughout the country. For the small town of Fairfield, with a population of just over 40,000, such incidents were very rare. Local residents rallied together and organized numerous search groups, conducted large-scale actions, and combed every corner of the city and its environs in the hope of finding at least some clue. Even the National Search Group from Texas joined the investigation, carefully examining forests, reservoirs, abandoned railway tracks, and other places where the missing girl could be. Caitlin's family did not lose hope and regularly appealed to local media with requests for help. John also did not stand aside, but many still had suspicions about his possible involvement. However, the groom repeatedly assured that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of his beloved and was fully assisting the investigation by providing all the necessary information. However, the feeling that in the eyes of the public he had long been found guilty did not leave John. Caitlin's skeletal remains were found under a pile of garbage. Experts found traces of cuts on her left wrist, left by a sharp object. Particularly striking was a V-shaped incision that even damaged the bone. Unfortunately, apart from this, no other evidence was found that could shed light on the circumstances of the girl's death. The exact cause of Caitlin's death was never established, but investigators immediately qualified this case as a murder. The girl's mobile phone was also not found near the place where her remains were discovered. After long months of anxious waiting, Caitlin's family was finally able to bury the girl. The walls of the mourning hall were decorated with Caitlin's works, and all those present, honoring her memory, were dressed in bright colors. In their speeches, people remembered her as a kind, sensitive, and creative person. John also spoke at the ceremony, telling about their joint plans for the future and dreams of a happy family life. John's cousin recalled Caitlin with special warmth, emphasizing that she always strived to give people goodness and sincere friendship. The girl's father, Dave, admitted that the burial of his daughter was a kind of completion of a certain stage for their family, but the pain of loss still did not subside. The man especially sympathized with his younger daughter, who was still very young at the time of Caitlin's disappearance. The place where the remains of the body were found significantly complicated the already difficult investigation. The discovery was made on the territory of another state, so the investigators had reasonable doubts that the body was initially left there. Now the police from two different departments had to join forces to unravel this tangle. The beginning of 2015 did not bring significant progress in the investigation. Despite the promised reward of $75,000 for any useful information, the case gradually began to lose its relevance. Dave, Caitlin's father, managed to persuade the sheriff of Butler County to reconsider the circumstances of his daughter's disappearance. Thus, the investigation was transferred from the jurisdiction of the Fairfield police to the sheriff's department. The man hoped that a fresh look at the facts would help the investigation finally move from a dead point, because most of all he was afraid that the crime would remain unsolved. In addition, Dave hired a private detective, J. Ryan Green, who began to study the circle of communication of Caitlin and John. The detective interviewed more than a dozen people, 5 of whom, unlike John Carter, agreed to take a polygraph test. Subsequently, the circle of suspects narrowed down to 2 people. One of them did not pass the lie detector test, which immediately attracted the close attention of investigators. In 2016, the police made public information that they had a suspect, but the evidence collected was not enough for an arrest. The private detective also noted that his suspicions completely coincided with the version of the official investigation. 12 long years have passed since the moment of Caitlin's disappearance, and here in 2023 the investigation finally moved from a dead point. Investigators reported the first arrest in this case. A man named Jonathan Palman was detained and charged with giving false testimony. The private detective noted that now the investigation is finally moving in the right direction and he has the opportunity to obtain a search warrant. As it turned out, Palman, Caitlin and John Carter were part of the same close circle of friends and knew each other well. Jonathan lived near Caitlin's house, and he was connected with John by a close friendship. Moreover, it was Palman who became the first person Carter called on the day Caitlin was declared missing. Shortly after Jonathan's arrest, the police conducted searches in 2 homes, in the house where he lived in 2011 at the time of the girl's disappearance, and also in the house of John Carter's mother, where her son lived. Palman will soon have to appear in court to give testimony about his alleged involvement in the crime, while investigators are tirelessly working to find new evidence. During the investigation, the name of another man surfaced, Michael Strauss, who was friends with Jonathan Palman and John Carter. In the past, Strauss had already been held responsible for stalking and assaulting another girl, which he eventually confessed to. However, his name was soon crossed off the list of suspects, and investigators focused all their attention on John Carter. After the discovery of Caitlin's body, John carefully avoided any contact with the media, preferring not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. Over the years, he managed to get married and start his own family, but the police did not loosen their vigilance towards him. The evidence collected did not fit into a single logical picture, and Carter's testimony contradicted each other time after time. Suspicions about John intensified when it became known that the teenagers who noticed 2 cars driving away from Caitlin's house with their headlights off on the night of her disappearance recognized one of those cars. It belonged to Carter. The driver of the second car could not be identified. In addition, that very night, the mobile phones of John and Caitlin turned off almost simultaneously, which also seemed very suspicious. And when police experts checked Carter's phone, they found that part of the correspondence with Caitlin, dated the evening of August 13 from 8 p.m. to 8:36 p.m., had been deleted. The messages that, according to John, he sent to the girl, including the morning greeting, never actually passed through the network of her mobile operator. Carter took a polygraph test 3 times, in September 2011, February 2014, and January 2021. Each time, the results indicated that he was lying, especially when asked whether he personally moved Caitlin's body. A search of his mother's house brought new findings. John's personal records relating to the course of the investigation, a folder with Caitlin's documents, a memory card, and a notebook with rather creepy poems were seized there, one of which was about how love can turn into hatred and the desire to kill. During the investigation, other evidence was also found that could indicate John Carter's involvement in the crime. In particular, investigators came across a material very similar to the one in which Caitlin's body was wrapped. An important fact was also that the place where the girl's remains were found was located near a farm owned by the Carter family. In addition, witnesses characterized John as a rather impulsive person prone to outbursts of aggression. The police even obtained video recordings in which Carter shouts at his wife while holding their little daughter in his arms. However, when investigators presented John with all this evidence, he did not show any special emotions and only dismissed them, calling it all circumstantial evidence. However, at that moment the police already had a fairly holistic idea of his probable involvement, so it was decided to transfer the case to the prosecutor's office. And so in March 2023, John Carter was arrested right at his workplace. He was charged on 2 counts at once. The first concerned the intentional murder of Caitlin, committed between August 13 and 14, 2011, and the second, the commission of a crime that led to her death. However, Carter was almost immediately released on bail, although its amount was a considerable $1 million. In addition, the man was obliged to wear a GPS tracker so that law enforcement officers could track his movements. Around the same time, Jonathan Palman, who was awaiting trial on charges of giving false testimony, was also released from custody. However, all charges against him were soon dropped. Currently, court hearings in the case of John Carter are scheduled for June 2024. For more than 10 years, the case of Caitlin's disappearance remained one of the most mysterious and confusing in the history of the city of Fairfield. But now, it seems, it has finally come to its logical conclusion. After all, John Carter, who was always considered the main suspect, admitted his guilt in involuntary manslaughter, which, according to the legislation of the state of Ohio, provides for responsibility for causing death by negligence. Dave, Caitlin's father, admitted that he feels extremely contradictory emotions about this. On the one hand, his long-standing suspicions about John's involvement in his daughter's death were finally confirmed, but on the other hand, the realization of this fact caused only even greater anger and indignation in the man. After all these years Carter lived as if nothing had happened, just continued his life, while Caitlin's family tirelessly fought for justice and punishment for the killer of their girl. And although during the court hearing, John did confess to being involved in the death of his fiancé, he categorically refused to disclose any details of what exactly happened on that fatal night. However, one of the prisoners with whom Carter crossed paths in the pre-trial detention center told detectives about his alleged confession. According to this prisoner, a fierce quarrel broke out between John and Caitlin. At some point the man knocked the girl to the floor and strangled her. Realizing what he had done, he began to panic and for some time hesitated whether to call an ambulance. But in the end, he decided to stage everything as if Caitlin had inflicted fatal wounds on herself. However, John never confirmed this information during interrogations, so it remains one of the unverified versions. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, the sentence handed down to Carter turned out to be surprisingly lenient. He was sentenced to the maximum term provided for by the article incriminated to him, namely, 3 years in prison with subsequent control by law enforcement agencies for another 3 years after his release. One of the investigators, John Steve, who took an active part in the investigation of this case, noted that during his long career he had to interrogate hundreds of different suspects, but for the first time he encountered such a callous and emotionless person as John Carter. In addition, the detective emphasized that the police had good reason to suspect that he could have acted not alone, but with the support of an accomplice, who then helped to get rid of Caitlin's body, and possibly even dismember it. However, this version could not be proven. Despite the fact that Caitlin's relatives and friends were finally able to find out the name of the person who took the life of their girl, the full picture of what happened on that tragic night remained a mystery to them. John Carter never even tried to explain what exactly happened between him and his fiancée and what pushed him to commit this terrible crime. Dave, the father of the deceased, very much doubted that he would ever be able to learn the whole truth. And even if one day Carter does decide to write a confession while in prison, the man is unlikely to be able to believe a single word of his after so many years of continuous lies. Soon John Carter is to be released after serving his assigned sentence. And although Caitlin's family mentally prepared for this day for all 3 years, this realization did not make it any less painful for them. After all, they still did not feel that justice had fully triumphed, and the criminal received the deserved retribution for his deed. Therefore, it is not surprising that 14 years later, when a memorial event dedicated to Caitlin's life was held in a local park, it evoked rather mixed feelings in her loved ones. In memory of the girl, several trees were planted, and all those present, in order to honor her memory, came in clothes with images of butterflies, insects that Caitlin loved so much since childhood. Dave admitted that over the years, these delicate creatures have become a kind of symbol of his daughter's presence for him. The man said that from time to time, especially in the most difficult moments, he saw a butterfly flying somewhere nearby. And each time this sight evoked memories of Caitlin and made him feel her invisible presence. At the same time, the girl's father could not come to terms with the realization that even after 14 long years of waiting for justice, he still did not know all the circumstances of her death. Every day Dave's thoughts returned to Caitlin and her unfulfilled future. After all, he was firmly convinced that her extraordinary creative talent would certainly have helped her reach incredible heights in life and in her beloved work. Instead, he was left only to contemplate the paintings of other artists and think that one of them could well belong to the brush of his talented daughter, if not for the fatal coincidence of circumstances that took her away so early and so unfairly. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.